So for the folks at home, welcome back to Mind Shifts with Markiesha Patrice. I'm your host, Markiesha Patrice, and with me today is my guest, Enoch Allotey. And he is here today to talk about working in pharma, what got him there, recently passed the state bar exam, and just kind of giving us his perspective on how we should be considering and thinking about the AI technologies that exist today and how they're affecting different industries, specifically in the pharma space. So welcome, Enoch. How are you?
Oh, I'm magical,
Yeah,
Markiesha. Thank you.
magical.
Thank you for having me today.
Magical mind shifts. I love that. Maybe that's the title of the episode today.
It should be.
I love it. So for the folks who don't know you, could you introduce yourself and share a bit of your background?
Yeah. So I've been in pharmaceuticals for a while, but my background has been very, not on the straight path, I'd say. It's been interesting. And so I'm a research development scientist, pharmaceutical scientist by training, but I'm also a lawyer.
Mhm.
And I'm currently an IT strategist in a pharmaceutical company.
Maybe starting with that, how did your career journey lead you to where you are today?
So initially, I wanted to go to medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to school with a biology degree, and I was looking to be done, take the MCAT, and then move on. And then I took a few years break to kind of test what the work world would be like,
Mm-hmm.
and also to get a little bit more experience before I go back to another 7 years of education. And during that time, I was doing R&D for pharmaceutical companies, and I was just hell-bent to go in medical school. This was a good prep for me. But part of my work put me into a space where I had to look at not just the reverse engineering version of the drug, but also to look at what enables the drug to come to market. I learned a very important lesson about business, in that it is not the composition of the drug itself, but it's the enabling policies and one big factor that we call intellectual property. I was very intrigued by that. And so at that moment, I pivoted. I decided to go to school for law to kind of combine that with the science, so then I could be better able to assist bringing medicine and making it accessible for people. And so my main goal overall has been how to improve access, how to get the medicine to the people.
Bringing it to the people. That is the thing. That's what I'm doing in some way, shape, or
Yes.
form, right? Is bringing the information around AI and just personal growth to the people. And so I guess I have a question for you around that initial mindset. Like, what was the aha moment for you, or the mind shift moment that happened for you, where you were like, if I don't start thinking about access using this technology, then it's going to change like the future? What was that moment for you?
So there were a few moments like that, and I touch point. So one of those was when I realized you need more than just the science of producing medicine. You need the enabling environment. So that brought in the law and the policy. And
Right.
then, back then AI wasn't as ubiquitous, right? It was
Yeah.
in small scale, or even maybe other things that were tangible to us, right? And so by the time I was in law school, this would be around 2019, I became very interested in automation and artificial intelligence and sorts. And I was privileged enough to have interned with the Department of State at the time on an AI research project, and that piqued my interest.
That was in 2019. So before the ChatGPT that we know today. It was
Yeah, my internship eventually became in 2020, but the project had started before me.
Yeah.
And it really put me in a different mindset, right? Because I'm noticing this technology being leveraged in every other space other than the spaces that I thought would enable and bring equitable access across the board. So you're seeing it in defense, you're seeing it in, other spaces. I didn't see that come to fruition for places that were publicly accessible in a way. These were big companies or big government projects.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to find a way through my own experience and incorporate that into my work. And so that's when the journey started. Once I started doing the research, once I started working for the State Department, then I started to think of how can this be made for the everyday person. And that's when the mind shift started for me.
Was the motivation just simply like, I want to start using this to be successful in my role, or was the motivation bigger than that of applying the AI technology?
Oh, it was grand. It
Yeah.
was grand from that standpoint. And like I tell people, I think my biggest asset in terms of, you know, why I do what I do or how I do what I do
Mhm.
is seeing things that I don't think a lot of people see.
Mm.
And at the time, I had realized that there was a gap. And it wasn't just a gap of wealth, it wasn't just a gap of knowledge, it was access to getting the knowledge, not even the knowledge itself. It's just
Mhm.
getting to it. Or it wasn't the money itself, it's getting to it. And technology seemed to be the appropriate tool that would exponentially close that at a very low cost. So you don't
Right.
need to invest so much money. If you can get a technology like this and it's readily accessible, it's just a matter of determination, not just opportunity for people
Right.
to bridge that gap. And so I started to invest more of my time into learning some of these things so I can share with other people so they get to notice that there is an opportunity that exists that doesn't cost them so much money, but there's their will to learn.
And so one thing that I think we all know, right, is one of the most expensive parts of the industry is research and development, right?
Correct.
When you think about it, what opportunity exists for AI to make an impact or change the current research and development process?
Well, that's a very good point. You know, when it comes to R&D, there are various aspects of it, and usually when I think of it, I think of at least two different aspects, right? It is one, the science itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then two is the data that supports the science, right? Because if you don't have data that is equitable, you don't have data that is diverse, you don't have data that is tidy, credible, and you don't have data in itself that is clean
Mm-hmm.
to feed the science, you might not get the right results. And if you don't have the science that is appropriate, that is able to reproduce itself, and that mimics what happens in the human body, you might also have different kinds of data. So
Mm.
when I was doing research in the lab, my focus was very much based on the data I generated for my experiments.
Right.
And I think this is where you can leverage AI because now we're talking about replicating systems. We're able to replicate experiments and we're able to create modules that would help us predict what these calculus would be in the future.
Right.
But we're also able to gather great sets of data than we've ever had to. And we're able to use artificial intelligence to synthesize this data to get all the various patterns that we can identify
Right.
at a lower cost. So we're going exponential in both directions. And I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that because a lot of companies, a lot of pharmaceutical companies have taken this on and they're doing a great job at expanding in both directions.
It's like going further, going faster at a more efficient pace. And so when you think about it, does that mean that we're going to be able to research and find cures faster? Like kind of what does that really mean in context of being able to utilize the technology in that way?
Yeah, it's true for both things, right? We could get drugs faster
Mm-hmm.
and we could do research faster. That has been established. I think maybe a year or so ago, a company here in the States used artificial intelligence to do a drug discovery process and was able to identify a candidate for psoriasis.
Oh wow.
And these processes could take years, but the
Mhm.
system was able to do it in months. So that shaves millions of dollars off of the overhead of the discovery, the folks that are needed to do it, as well as time that some of these scientists who might have been dedicated to aspects of this experiment needed to do. That company was eventually acquired by Takeda, and I
Mhm.
think they're going through their regulatory phases now, and those drugs will be available to the general public. But this has shrunk the time of discovering a candidate to production by at least a decade.
Wow, a decade. And so how much time does it typically take for a drug to go from the R&D to market?
It could take anywhere from 7 to 13, 14 years.
Wow.
Yes.
And that's almost like that's like a generation almost when you think
Correct.
about it.
Correct.
Wow. And so we're speeding up the drug discovery process and the innovation process at a remarkable clip. Do you see that AI is going to help maybe accelerate like drug production of certain types of treatments or therapies faster than others? Like, are there some where you don't think, I guess, AI is going to be as impactful or be able to move as fast as it's moved in other areas?
Well, I think when it comes to that, there is a human element that comes into play. There's a business element that comes to play.
Hmm.
Pharmaceutical companies are a business after all,
Right.
and so they would have to make the decision strategically for the business, for their shareholders, where to invest their resources.
Mm.
But now that we have artificial intelligence, that might reduce the time for the discovery, production, and the cost. They might be incentivized to diversify further. So we might have a two play here where maybe the savings that are being made could be invested in other neglected areas
Yeah.
to expand and diversify the portfolio, or it could be reinvested into the existing areas to even make it much more faster. And so that is a prediction that I can't make, but I sense that a lot of the industry folks that I've spoken to are looking to explore those two options, to
Hmm.
take the savings and then expand into rare diseases and almost neglected diseases, because it would cost them relatively less to do that exploration.
Hey, Mind Shifters, it's me, your host, Markiesha Patrice. And if you like what you hear, you like what you see, and you want to hear more conversations like this, then hit the subscribe button so that the algorithm can push more content from me to you. Absolutely. And another thing I think we started to talk about was access, the access to healthcare. And you were around, you knew during COVID-19 kind of how the vaccines were distributed. How do you think that would have even changed if AI technology was even where it is today?
Well, when it comes to access, I think it's a very complex conversation, and it's layered and it's very intricate. But I will say this: when you look at solving problems related to access,
Hmm.
there are certain factors which we call the social determinants of health that are directly related to access, and they themselves are very intricate. And so what what ends up happening is that unless these issues themselves are addressed,
Hmm.
and they are addressed systematically, you could have success with a certain demographic in this particular city or zip code, whilst you wouldn't have a replicatable success elsewhere.
And so I think we've also focused on where the communities stand to benefit and gain. When you're working in, let's say Capitol Hill and you're in the DC area and you are around the policy kind of, what are you hearing as some of the regulatory conversations around AI in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry lie?
Yeah, this is a challenge. I don't think there's a single person group that has the answer, because ideally what happens with policy is very historical, right? We're chasing what already exists, and most of the time we're hoping to catch the bad before it happens. But fortunately, the reality is the bad happens, then we make laws to make sure they don't happen again.
Hmm.
And so we're always chasing them. And there is a great portion of even getting to the right amount of regulation that's based in expertise. The
Mm.
government or the regulating body has to have the expertise. But we're not seeing that yet, because right now, most of the expertise around artificial intelligence, large language models exists in the private market.
Right.
And so, first, we'll have to bring in those expertise into the legal and the legislative conversations from the governmental side, from the public health side. And once that is established and that has taken ground, we can start to see certain level of regulation. I'm not dismissing the fact that there are conversations, that there are contributions going
Mhm.
on, but the very bodies that are required to set up and regulate some of these issues have either don't have the desired manpower and the expertise, or probably don't exist. As you'll know, we don't have an agency just regulating artificial
But
intelligence
should
across
that
the board.
exist though? Because I mean, when I think about it, right, and this is something I'm sure my view on this may change over time as things play out, but I almost think that that has to happen. There has to be some sort of governing body and maybe multiple governing bodies across different verticals or different industries, but at some point somewhere we all have to say if we think that this technology is going to do all of the things that they're saying it's going to do, shouldn't there be a
Yes,
regulatory body that's kind of governing this?
yes, there should be, and I'll paint a picture this way, right? There are schools of thoughts around this.
Mhm.
One says, well, we can have divisions within all of the agencies that's dedicated to computing, to artificial intelligence, to large language models, so that the FDA, the DOH, all of these agencies themselves are able to have a division that's dedicated to that. Another school of thought would be, let's just create one agency that does AI across the board,
Mhm.
and they deal with all the large language models across the board, so then they can, as a body, set the governing rules.
Mhm.
Both come with challenges, and
Mhm.
both, lead to regulation, but they lead to it through different paths. And so the shortcomings is still the expertise. Do
Right.
we have enough expertise? And just recently, we have quantum
Quantum
computing.
computing. Yeah.
That in itself, it's opening up a bigger scope for computing capability. Do we have the expertise amongst the law enforcement and lawmaking bodies
Right.
to regulate that properly? Unfortunately, I don't think there is an adequate amount, if there is any, to
Right.
support that kind of work. So there are big challenges around.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I kind of want to just also say that there doesn't have to be like one regulatory body, as we know, right? There's so many different pathways to this. But I think the reason why that is a thought of safeguard is because there's so much that we still don't know. And also people are not necessarily motivated to learn it
Yeah.
because there's fear, there's intimidation. But what I also think is that another way to consider this is having people learn how this is being employed across industries in places that they work. If they knew how LLMs and large language models and multimodal models are being used to kind of create new drugs or new therapies or new treatments for them, they might have an opinion on this. They might say, hey, I want it to be this way. And with that education, it comes power and it becomes a responsibility almost,
Yes.
right? Like you feel like I'm responsible for this. I just wanted to touch on real quickly when you think about the potential to transform healthcare in a meaningful way for people every day. So I don't mean just drugs and drug discovery, but how might I benefit from AI being in my doctor's hospital or my doctor's office versus it not being there?
Yeah. I mean, so there have been great approaches, some not so great,
Mhm.
but some more holistic than others, right? I think recently I discovered that a company that I was so keen on trying their work here in New York, unfortunately, do not run anymore. But they used to have these booths where you
Mhm.
can go in for a full body scan, and it'll give you all the vitals that you needed. You can set your regular, monthly checkups, and it's able to use the AI to support whatever a doctor would discover in the back end.
Mhm.
We need more of those, but the infrastructure to support that kind of business, the trust that people need, the education that would give them the confidence to work with things like that isn't in place yet. So, of course, the education must happen, but we're lacking in that.
Mhm.
The other aspect of this, you know, overall bringing this is that there's a lot of potential that already exists. All the wearables that we have,
Right.
all of the technology that we already use have potential to bring everything together. However, there are other gaps that need to be plugged. And
Mm.
when I say other gaps, I'm looking at all of the opportunities that exist for people who are not well intended to capture this data and weaponize it or use it for other nefarious things, such as bioweapons and whatnot, just
Right.
using this data against us. That needs to be also plugged. And this is where, the bigger issue of expertise become a question, right? Because
Right.
everybody is going to, or most people will relegate this to a government agency. The manpower might not exist, the know-how might not exist, but that's where we are. We have the opportunity, we have some capabilities, but we have a bigger issue of how do we secure this long term? Who do we look at for these guidelines? And how do we make sure that the people gain trust to use these systems?
And I guess that's a question too, is like how do we, the people who are actively in the space, who are building with the technology, using this technology, how do we create that trust with the general population? How do we say, hey, come and get your body scan so we can use this data to give you a better report on your overall health? How do we get them to feel like they can trust it and not feel like, the computer is going to take my data from me and use it against me? And then also on the back of that, I guess the other question is, can we even really protect from the bad doers?
Well, the first one, I think it's a very difficult thing, and I don't think I have the answer to it. That's a lifelong question that we've always wondered for all the well-meaning people in healthcare is that, for better or for worse, we've had historical mistreatment of groups. So getting past that might be a special way for us to approach this issue. And it might be a little bit more complicated. Besides that, there are people who also do not actively see the benefit of the science that we're deploying for curing diseases unless the thing happens to them. Right? They don't generally think of it as like, oh, this could be a good until they're in that situation. The second question, I think, was relating to
Can we protect against bad actors?
protecting against bad actors, and that is also an age-old question. Generally, we would want majority of the users of a system or majority of society to be law-abiding.
Right.
Generally, that's the ideal situation. No matter what, you can't have 100%, and we're aware of that. And so what legislation, what enforcement has to do is to make sure that they minimize the impact as much as possible, at least the predictable impact. Right? So they'll sit down, look at it, and say, if we put these guardrails in place, we cannot eliminate the nefarious activity, but we can minimize its impact.
Right.
And that's,
I guess that's with any
a theory.
technology.
Yes,
It's like people went from cash to credit cards, and people got their credit cards stolen, and all the things. So
yeah.
I agree with you, and I definitely think that that's a mind shift that needs to kind of be adopted in some respect. And the mind shift isn't to trust the technology, but it's to come up with a way of what do you need in place
Correct.
in order to feel like you can trust the technology. I think that that's really critical. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about Ghana because you're a Ghanaian boy.
Born and raised, yeah.
And I had the pleasure of joining you and your wife in Ghana last year. And it was beautiful. It's such a beautiful country. And
thank you.
We had an incredible experience. I didn't know that you guys could dance so much.
It's in the genes.
Child, I was over here trying to get a little hip hop, and I couldn't even keep up. But when I was there, I had the opportunity not to just go to Accra, but also I went to Ada. And I was just so blown away by, one, how much joy and how much happiness people in Ghana have, and how rich the culture is. But then also, you do see that juxtaposed against infrastructure challenges and barriers, right? There are several times where, the power would go out, or, I didn't have cell phone service everywhere, and that's just the nature of it. But when you think about the opportunity that lies ahead with AI technology, do you think that there is a way for it to truly start to make a significant impact in Ghana?
Yes, I think in actuality, places like Ghana are going to benefit the most from properly implemented AI technology. And this is why I'll break it down this way. When, you were in Ghana, you'll notice that outside of using cash, there's this thing called mobile money, or Momo. And Momo is probably the most popular way of payment in Ghana. You can send people money, you can send them credit, you can pay at the store with this credit, you can lend money, you can borrow money on the platform, and it's all fintech based going through the telecommunication services. So already technology has taken a stronghold in Ghana. Unfortunately, Ghana, like most African countries, have seen a significant brain drain in terms of resources that are able to do the complex work that needs to be done, especially professionals like doctors and nurses and in healthcare. And so some statistics would say for every 10,000 people, there are 2 doctors available to them. That's really low. And so what companies like Mineral Health and other companies are doing is to replicate that knowledge base that these professionals will represent and make sure that even with limited actual people, they have these systems set in place so they oversee them so that instead of having 2 for every 10,000, we can employ maybe additional 6 systems that are looking at the radiology or mammogram or whatever comes out of these systems so that those 2 doctors effectively operate as 4 doctors using and leveraging AI. And I think places like Ghana are the best places to experiment some of these systems, fine-tune them for the people, and then eventually give credibility to employing AI in that way to the West. So then, as things progress, it gets better and better.
Right. I mean, that's a perfect example of augmentation, right? There's always the fear. People talk so much about, job displacement with AI, but that's a perfect example of augmentation.
Yes.
Of saying, hey, we need more. We need more people to do this job.
Yes.
And so we can utilize the technology to do that. And I guess that brings me to another conversation, kind of along the same lines. But when you think about the application of AI, not just maybe in the healthcare space in Ghana, do you see there other opportunities across the country?
Yes. Yes. I see it across the board from healthcare, arts. I mean, I don't see any industry in which it won't touch. And I'll just give you I was thinking about this on my way here, right? There are close to, last time I checked, about 40 languages and dialects in this country of about 30 million people.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of history,
I need
culture.
to learn at least one of them.
Oh, you will by the end of this session. There are a lot of things that are orally transmitted, right? There's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of stories, culture that is not readily available in books as at least to my heart desire. I want it to be.
Right.
And so what we can start to do is to build these systems that are able to learn and grasp all or part of these cultures and start to develop a whole library and start to develop a digital footprint of the culture itself so that when you look at Ghana, you can take this thing and you would be able to, not just on a Google level, but be able to interact with your local culture. And I think, for example, and this is just the arts, you can talk about banking, we can talk about navigation, and even how to replicate simple systems to generate power using solar panels, whatever the technology is, we can start to leverage large language models that already have this knowledge and then build upon it using our own cultural context so that it's custom to the people.
Hey, Mind Shifters, it's me, your host, Markiesha Patrice. And if this conversation is inspiring to you, thought-provoking, you have any questions, maybe sparked a bit of curiosity, leave a comment with your mind shift moment. Would love to hear what's going on in your world and how I can provide more mind shifts like this to you. I actually really believe that would be very powerful. And a few different reasons why. When you're learning a language, right, and you probably know this coming and having to learn multiple languages yourself, is the cultural context matters in how you deploy that language. So it's how you relate. So that idea that you mentioned, to me, it's so resonant because yes, we have these translators where you won't even need to know how to speak the language, but then are we losing? It's like we're losing recipes, we're losing culture.
Yes.
And I almost think that's the danger. That's a harmful way that this technology specifically is being applied. But ultimately, becoming a global citizen, a culturally rich person, is to understand culture and is to understand language. So I really, really love that concept and idea that you speak of. On another note, though, coming back to the healthcare side of it too, and some of the other, I guess, downfalls is when you go to developing countries, we're seeing that curable diseases are very deadly.
Yes.
Do you see that as an opportunity where, maybe pharma is considering using the technology to maybe treat curable diseases in developing countries?
I see that as a great opportunity. And I think this is why I find some of the work that companies like Agro AI and Mino AI that I spoke about are doing, because they're focused on their local market. And so
Mm,
one such company is taking these large language models to examine what they see in the microscope, to kind of analyze the mammograms to detect if they're cancerous, or to even see from a slide in a microscope if malaria is present in this, and having systems like that, which are easily replicatable at a lower cost compared to training someone from year 1 to year 7 to detect this,
right.
will by far expand access to this. The
Mm-hmm.
second part of the conversation now is, yes, we've identified that you're sick, but we need a cure for it.
Right.
And so that's where the pharmaceutical companies come in, producing these treatments. And, we save costs when we are able to use AI to expedite already existing. But then there is, like I said, a commercial aspect of producing medicine. And for some of these companies, their desire is to diversify their portfolio. So some of them will take that on and
Mm-hmm.
have actively taken that on to explore neglected disease groups and tropical diseases. But the more empowering aspect is that local companies in these countries themselves can now leverage these modules to find or expand the use of local treatments that they've had. So when you
Right.
go to places like Ghana, malaria exists, but there were herbal treatments that they've used,
Right.
right? So perhaps they can leverage AI to find effective ways to use these, or to make these
More
treatments
available.
more available for other people, to encapsulate them, to define it with science, extract the ingredients and make it into a syrup, whatever it is. But that possibility also exists. So yes, for the already established Western pharmaceutical companies, but for the
Mhm.
local people, the more ubiquitous these systems are, the more it will enable them to set up their own cultural context of how they've dealt with this, but to
Mhm.
make it more accessible to them, other
That's
people.
empowering the people. It's like you said, it's creating independence.
Yes.
It's creating true economic and regulatory and independence. Because a lot of these countries, as you mentioned, they do rely on the West to
Yes.
send us goods, send us treatment, send us this. So I think that's a very powerful use case. And something else that I wanted to touch on in particular, do you believe that there will ever be, like with the way that the technology is moving, will there be a universal health care system that people can buy into, that people can participate in? Like, what are your views on that?
That it's a political issue. If that is asserted as equal to the right to live, or to the right to do whatever is fundamental, then you can see, but I don't see that happening across the board. So,
I mean, I think that's interesting because it's almost like that is the question of AI versus humans, right? Is like, what is it that inherently is human, that humans need, that humans require? And to your point, like, universal healthcare is almost like a right to live, is a right to be healthy, is a right to exist. But I guess if I were to add my 2 cents, I do think that there's a future where that becomes a battleground, an immediate battleground for how fast we innovate and adopt this technology, is making sure that human rights are protected as the technology advances. Before we kind of wrap up, I wanted to start by, or go back to a few things because we started this conversation in a very personal way. And so I wanted to hear from you kind of what is your personal POV on this technology, on AI technology?
well, from my standpoint, I think, and this I'd have to admit, it's privileged because I've had the opportunity to learn about, large language models before it became a little bit more popular than it is now. But I would say that the hope for all of mankind, given that we still maintain the well-intended people in these powerful positions, to keep doing the good that they're doing is to benefit everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, companies like mine are bringing in safeguards that already exist
Right.
that we know are beneficial into the new systems. What I mean by this is, the good things that we believe privacy regulation has provided through HIPAA and other regulations, the GDPR and so on. We're trying to inculcate that into the existing system to make sure that even when we build AI and we build new products and new delivery mechanisms, we're still regarding the old laws that exist. So that's
Right.
one way we're trying to set the safeguard. The other part is to make sure that the education is broad, and that cuts from kindergarten all the way to PhDs. Make sure that the access to that information is available so that people themselves have the opportunity to even pose questions that the experts don't have.
And it's almost like we need to encourage that part, is
Correct.
encourage the advocacy so that people's voices are heard.
Correct.
Because I think that sometimes we as a people can check out and be like, oh, that's above me, or I don't understand that, so I'm going to separate myself from it, or I'm going to ignore it. And instead I'm going to go and listen to this thing. And I think that's the wrong approach. That's the wrong attitude.
Yes. And most people need to hear it from folks that they consider are much like themselves, right? And I put myself into shoes of the everyday person, and I would love to see another person who looks like me, sounds like me, has a similar background, giving me the tea, or letting me understand that, hey, it's okay to invest your time, and the door is not necessarily shut to you. There are people you can reach out to if you do need to be brought into certain spaces or you're curious about things like that.
Right.
And so I take that responsibility very, very seriously. And I always tell people, you have to learn, you have to educate yourself, you have to at least try to understand the very simple base fundamentals of it, and ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but become active in your own little space amongst your friends, your family. If you're confident enough, start reading up what the policies are coming out, what the news is saying about it, and how you in your own little way, because I know my job, I know my life. I know how AI affects it now. You know yours better than I do. And so you'll be the best person to advocate for yourself and people who are in your position, who are employment of the similar stature. And you're able to advocate at that level that I might not be able to. So I encourage everybody to get active.
Right. I love that. I love that as well. Okay, so let's talk about the future.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. What do you see as the future in AI and pharma? Like, where are you seeing focus and investment being put for 2025?
I've had this conversation a few times. I'll state what I see now.
Okay.
Right. I think now there's a lot of investment in corporate productivity. A lot of the investment being made is to ensure that employees are working productively. My hope is that eventually we will start focusing, at least as a people, and start demanding the application and the use cases being transferred closer to the goal than to what will cut the overhead of the company, to what will bring us the solution sooner and more effectively. That's a transition.
Let's stay there for a moment, because that's a major mind shift, because it's not just a mind shift for the people who are doing the work, but it's a mind shift for the corporations who have the strategy and laying the roadmap for that. So when you think about it, you're saying don't think about AI as a way to cut costs and save money initially, right? That's a great way, like that will happen eventually. We know that that's part of becoming more efficient and using technology the right way. But instead, it's really thinking about it from the lens of, how do we use this to solve this specific problem better?
Correct.
Right? And sometimes better doesn't mean no humans.
Correct.
Like that's not always the outcome. Sometimes it's, I'm going to take this part and give this to the AI so that the human can do this part, because that's what they're better at.
Yes, implementation is a very important feature, right? Of getting the things from paper into reality. And I think this is where the human at the helm comes in, and you need that intervention. You need that human intervention throughout the process. We can't do without that. But the more important thing for me is the incentive, right? Businesses stay profitable and they go according to the direction of their shareholders, and which is the profit. And in order for them to remain and stay in business, they have to be incentivized.
Right.
And so making sure that we're drawing out and linking the business's objective through the incentive to the outcome we want is important. And so it's not just, oh, don't do this, make sure the outcome comes first, but making sure that we're connecting that objective to that outcome and saying, hey, if you invest or if you do redirect the resources into developing a better system, the outcome will be exponential because now you will reach other people that you never reached in the past.
Right.
Drawing that connection incentivizes the business to reposition its resources from cutting overhead to exploring or expanding its existing market. And that's what the difference is.
Those are the things that we have to consider.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about a personal mind shift that you've recently experienced. Because I think that as much as we talk about mind shifts in AI technology, it's also important to talk about it in our personal lives and how we can show up better and be more impactful. So kind of what's been a recent mind shift for you?
This will be very interesting, but I think, you take for granted who you become because of what you say to yourself.
Ooh.
Right? And I'm guilty. I'm guilty of this. I think most people are. But who you become is largely dependent on what you say to yourself over and over and over again. And so until you are comfortable with saying the things that you want to become to yourself, you will never become those things.
Amen.
And so, recently I have come to terms with that ideology a little bit more strongly. And it's not just woo-woo spiritual, but it actually works. That you envisioning and seeing, giving yourself grace, identifying that through hard work, dedication, and a little bit of luck, perhaps, you are able to attain certain things, setting those goals, and speaking to yourself about those things in a positive way will help you achieve that. Has tremendously shifted my mindset into being more tactical in my approach to my goals recently.
I'm a believer in manifestation. I've manifested my whole life. I think about all the things that I've ever wanted in life, and I have them. Not saying that I have them all right in this moment, but I know that they're coming.
Yes.
And I know that the things that I have been able to attain, it's become through because of my self-talk and my own manifestation. And I've seen that again and again.
It's definitely an important note to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been good. This has been fun. I hope you all at home have enjoyed this. I definitely enjoyed it. Your company has been amazing. Your energy is spectacular.
It's magical.
It's magical. But thank you so much, Enoch, for being here today. Thank you all for tuning in, listening, and watching. My name is Markiesha Patrice. This is Mind Shifts. Thank you for mind shifting with me.